Many in the tech industry say they are desperate to fill open positions and argue that turning away foreign talent because there aren't enough visas jeopardizes the country's position as a leader in technology and innovation. There's a tremendous frustration, which I share, among tech companies that have been asking us to improve the system for more years than I can count, and nothing has been able to move it. That's according to U.S. Representative Zoe Lofgren of California. Now, she's the chairwoman of the House Immigration and Citizens Subcommittee, whose district also includes Silicon Valley. So you understand why she's concerned. Ultimately, says Ms. Lofgren, this could hurt the U.S. economy. There's no rule that Silicon Valley is always going to have the tech crown. And that is very true. Now, Ms. Lofgren has pushed to increase the number of available visas, and she's also working with Republican Darrell Issa. Ms. Lofgren is a Democrat, and they're trying to make changes on the H-1B program. She has also proposed legislation to eliminate a per-country cap for employment-based immigrant visas. So not only is there a cap on the number of visas, there's a cap on the number of countries from which they can come. Now, Democrats have halted H-1B legislation in past years, saying they want that program to be addressed as part of a broader set of immigration changes. Ms. Grundy-Young says tech lobbyists are trying to reset the debate by talking about the H-1B program as a workforce issue rather than an immigration matter. And that kind of is true. Okay? Tech workers aren't faceless, nameless people just wanting to get across the border to get a better job. These are people with real skills that we need in this country. Now, she also said that Techna's study, reviewed by the Wall Street Journal and set to be released later this week, shows that tech jobs shifted during the pandemic from places like Silicon Valley and New York City to smaller hubs, like Nashville, Tennessee. In fact, the pandemic has accelerated a trend of U.S. technology companies looking for easier ways to hire software engineers and developers they need, and becoming far more open to remote work to get talent on board. That has meant leaving workers in their countries of origin, including India, or moving them to English-speaking countries with more lax immigration policies, rather than competing with H-1B or other specialized U.S. visas, immigration reform advocates said. There's still a desire for the employer to have their employees in the U.S., but if that's not possible, they will hire talent and place them where they are able to work productively. That's according to Stuart Anderson, Executive Director of the National Foundation for American Policy, which is a nonpartisan research organization that focuses on trade and immigration. Mr. Anderson goes on. What the pandemic has shown is that remote work in another country can be a productive option. Can be. They don't prefer it. But if you can't do this, you're going to do that. Okay? Now, Mob Squad, which is a Canadian firm that helps match U.S. tech companies with foreign workers and relocates them to Canada, said business has quadrupled since the pandemic began and is working on placement for more than 50 companies. Now, there was some hesitation before the pandemic to have workers spread across so many offices in so many cities. That's according to Arif Kamani. That's Mod Squad's president and chief operating officer. Now they've proven to themselves that remote work isn't a problem. Once again, Techna studied how tech jobs have shifted since the pandemic and found that Tennessee had the largest increase in tech jobs, 8%. Tennessee. Not California, not New York, not even Florida. Tennessee. Now, even so, research by the Nashville Regional Technology Council found that there were about 15,000 open industry positions, and they worry about Tennessee-based tech companies turning to Canada. That, folks, is telling. Nobody's hired more since the people in Tennessee, but there's still 15,000 positions that they're not able to fill. Now, according to Elise Cambrick, who is the chief executive officer for the Nashville Technology Council, she says that the rising need for tech talent is overshadowing the incoming number of tech workers coming into Nashville. So the need is here. A lot of people are coming here, but it's still not nearly enough. Now, once upon a time, the age-old adage said, well, just take some of those assembly line workers who no longer have jobs and train them to write code. That's ridiculous. In fact, that's a silly option. There's very few assembly line workers who can or even want to be trained to write code. And by the way, there's also very few assembly line workers out of a job. There's very few people from any line of work out of a job. As of right now, there's a shortage of workers, period. Assembly line workers are in demand, warehouse workers are in demand, truck drivers are in demand. And even if they weren't, those people don't want to write code, and it's not their skill set. But think about it. If you've got people from another country, especially countries like India or the Philippines where they speak English, and they want to come here, why not let them? Especially if they have a skill that the country can benefit from. I've said this for many, many, many years, and that's compare the United States to Major League Baseball. While we may have a problem with our farm system, we can always sign the best free agents. And you think to yourself, well, that's taking jobs away from Americans, Strong. Well, if somebody moves from the Philippines or India or Eastern Europe and they move to this country and get a tech job, would you think they're going to save their money and go back to India or the Philippines? Sure, that happens sometimes. But most of the time, they don't do that. They move here. They like it here. They live here. They become citizens. In other words, they're now an American, a productive American, just like you and I, who came from someplace else. I don't know why we wouldn't want to revise the H-1B program and let more of these people into the country. Because if we don't, they'll just work for Mumbai. And here's the thing. If you take a guy who works for a New York City company and lets him stay in Mumbai, all of a sudden that goes from a $150,000 a year job to maybe a $30,000 a year job, because you don't have to bring them over. And a $30,000 a year job, that's a lot of money for Mumbai. Now, you may be able to go from $150,000 in New York City to $130,000 in Miami, but it's still Miami. It's still $130,000. And if things change, okay, so you got to pay him an extra $20,000 to get him to move back to New York City. I get that. You're not going to pay an extra $120,000 to get him to move someplace else rather than Dubai. So once the lion's out of the cage, once the cobra's out of the cage, it's not being put back. I find those articles very interesting, and I wanted to share them with you, dear listeners, while I'm spending my time here in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Well, that's it. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Email address, jamesstrongshow@hotmail.com. That's my email address. Send me your email. I respond to the emails. Send me your email link. I will send you a link to the podcast. You can download it and listen to it at your leisure, or just go on to the 1.5 million different download sites that you get your podcasts. Chances are, if you get your podcast from that site, put James Strong Show in there. I pop up. I'm just about every place. That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.